Welcome to Tucker Carlson tonight. The Commerce Department today announced changes to the census. Ordinarily, that would not be a very big deal. Starting in 2 years, respondents will be asked if they're U.S. citizens. That question has been asked on census forms in years past, and there are obvious reasons for asking it. The main point of the census, this is why the Constitution requires it, is to apportion congressional districts so Americans can vote for their representatives. Only U.S. citizens are allowed to vote in federal elections, so it might be nice to know how many live in this country. Sound reasonable to you? Even boring? Are you still awake? If not, then you're not a professional outrage merchant. The left came close to losing consciousness today over this idea. The Attorney General of California, Javier Becerra, says he will sue the Trump administration over this change. Becerra claims that asking people whether or not they're citizens is somehow unconstitutional. Watch.
Given the way that this administration has attacked immigrants, you can understand why immigrant families would be afraid to fill out the census questionnaire. In our lawsuit, we argue that this decision by the Trump administration violates the Constitution and federal law.
Well, Ari Berman of Mother Jones Magazine is even madder than Javier Becerra. Berman apparently misplaced his Xanax this morning. He got so worked up about the census question, he described the change as, quote, a huge crisis for democracy. Oh, come on. Nobody actually believes that. Nobody believes lines like that, even the red-faced people who scream them. The left doesn't care about what is or what is not constitutional. Did you watch the gun march this weekend? Obviously, they don't care. A crisis for democracy? If you really cared about democracy, representative democracy, you'd be vigilant about preventing voter fraud. Instead, the left actively abets it in state after state, including California, where illegals get driver's licenses and can register to vote. Democracy, please. What progressives really care about is power. They hate the fact that you took some of their power by voting for Donald Trump, and they want it back by any means necessary. That's what this is about, obviously. Cesar Vargas is an attorney and an illegal immigrant, and he joins us tonight. Cesar, thanks for coming on. Tell me why,
thank you for having me.
Counting your citizens, asking whether they are citizens, how could that be unconstitutional when the Constitution requires that you count your citizens?
Well, we're talking about the Constitution, right? And Republicans and conservatives are all about the original intent, the founding meaning of the Constitution. Well, the Constitution explicitly states that we need an actual enumeration. In other words, an actual count of the whole persons in each state. Never said anything about immigration status, never said anything. The purpose is to count everyone in the United States, regardless of the immigration status. So that's perfect. As a person who approves of original intent, you would understand that we need to count everything and abide by the Constitution.
So
I'm just talking about the Constitution at this moment.
No, I know you're lecturing me the Constitution. But does this change say that you're not allowed to count people who are non-citizens? No. It says take account of them. It's one of the many questions. The Constitution, by the way, since I know you're so familiar with it, doesn't say anything about counting people by race. The census does that. Are you opposed to that? Should we not ask what people's race is?
Well, under this administration, we have been very clear that it's about targeting immigrants. When the president says we're going to target Mexicans and rapists,
I'm going to let you read your bumper sticker. Wait, stop. I want you to answer my question because I think it's a fair question. You don't think that the census form ought to be allowed to ask people whether they're here legally or whether they're citizens or not. Okay. But you do think it ought to be allowed to ask them what their genetic makeup is, what their race is? Why?
Well, I think we should definitely have a very simple document that says, hey, how many people live in your home? How many people have an opportunity to live in the state? I think that's simple. I'm not putting aside the politics about race, about immigration status. I'm agreeing with you that we should count people.
What about their race? The census asks what your race is. I think it's creepy as hell, to be honest, since your race has nothing to do with any choice that you made, something you're born with. But the census asks it, and it asks it because the left demands that it ask it. Do you think the census ought to be allowed to ask people's race?
Well, I think we should have a simple count. That's it.
Or no?
And maybe no. I think we shouldn't have immigration status. We shouldn't have about race. We shouldn't say, hey, how many people live in your house? That's it. That's what the Constitution requires. It's all about allocation and representation.
What about male or female? Should it ask that? Should it be allowed? Is that unconstitutional too?
Well, I think if a person wants to designate, hey, I'm a male, I'm a female, let them answer that question.
Hold on, but that wasn't the question. The census asks, are you a man or a woman? Are you non-Hispanic white? Are you African American? Are you American Indian? And now it's going to ask, are you a citizen? Only one of those questions bothers you. not because of the constitutionality of it, but because you think it might dilute the political power of illegal aliens.
No.
So let's stop pretending this is about the Constitution, because it's not.
I'm agreeing with you that it should be about counting people based on people, not about representation,
okay, so
about whether you're citizens or not. It's not about voting power.
Of illegal
the
alien lawyers
census does
and say, you know
not
what?
say
Let's take the
anything
race
about
questions
voting.
off.
The Constitution says, hey, we just need to count people. If you're a male or if you're a female, great. But
so
when you talk about representation, about citizenship, that's a whole different story.
Slow down. Why is it a difference? It's a different story because you think it might dilute the political power of illegal aliens who, I could add, I'm not a lawyer like you, shouldn't be here in the first place. But you're not bothered by sex or race. So let's just stop pretending. Let's drop the facade. Let's stop playing the stupid game where we pretend it's about your concerns about the Constitution of a country that you're not even allowed to be in, because I think you're here illegally too. So let's just say this is about pure political power. It's about one side trying to take back power from the other. And, let's be adults about it. Can we do that, or do you want to keep this pretense going?
That shows that that's concern of your views. That's a concern of you, that you're afraid that if you count undocumented immigrants, that's going to dilute your power. It's not about power. It's about simple representation. The fundamental principle of this nation is about equal representation, regardless of your immigration status. We all have a voice. And you know the Constitution is not just about citizenship.
Okay. Citizenship is the basis upon which we determine political power. Citizens have political power, non-citizens don't. That's the difference. If you want to distill citizenship to a sentence, there you have it. And so, yes, I do want to dilute the political power of the citizens of other countries. I don't think that Russian citizens or Nigerian citizens or citizens from the Seychelles ought to be allowed to vote in my elections. That's constitutional. It's the definition of constitutional.
Well, that's not what America stands for. What America stands for is that you can be 100% American, but you can be 100% Mexican, African, French, and so forth.
Actually,
so you know what?
Citizens
in this country, we're allowed to have dual citizenship. You know that?
By the way,
we're allowed to have American citizenship and Mexican citizenship and French citizenship. That's the crazy thing about how beautiful this country is about.
But you're not allowed to not have citizenship and vote, which leads to a question I've been meaning to ask you for some time as we've been abetting your illegal stay here in this country. Do you plan to vote in the next election? I think you live in California. They'll let you vote. It's illegal. Do you plan to do it anyway based on the theory you just elucidated for the rest of us?
Well, we're talking about counting. I do think that every person should be counted.
Are you going to vote?
Now,
it's a simple
your question about universal, I do believe that we should have universal voting for everyone to ensure that everyone has
for citizens
democracy,
of other countries.
Everyone has a republic. This
Putin should be able to vote here.
No taxation without representation. I believe that. That's a fundamental of this nation, isn't it?
Who comes to the United States and buys a deck of Marlboros and pays the sales tax is entitled to vote. That's what you're saying.
If that person comes here to contribute to the country, let him have a say in his government. Simple as that.
Let foreigners vote. I hope the Democratic Party runs on that. I think it'd be a fun election. Caesar, thank you for being honest.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Tucker. Take care.
Chris Kobach is the Secretary of State of the state of Kansas. He's been following these issues closely because he cares, and he joins us tonight. Mr. Secretary, thanks for coming on. So,
thanks for having me, Tucker.
Explain to us why it's important to know whether or not people counted by the census are American citizens.
There are a million reasons why. The first and foremost is that any sovereign nation needs to know how many citizens it has. The second is that all kinds of statistics require us, like unemployment statistics, knowing how many of the people in the United States are citizens and how many are non-citizens, meaning aliens, both legal and illegal. We have to know that. And then apportionment. If Congress decides, as it should, to stop counting illegal aliens, we need to know exactly how many are in each category. I mean, it's absurd that states like California have an inflated number of representatives in Congress because they have so many illegal aliens in it. So, there's so many reasons. But let me just quickly respond to your previous guest. I couldn't stop laughing. His notion that it's unconstitutional to count citizens. Ask people if they're citizens or not. Look, we started doing this in the 1820 census. The founding fathers were still alive in 1820. If it was unconstitutional to ask, are you a citizen, they would have said, hey, don't ask the citizenship question. That's unconstitutional. And the second thing is, the Supreme Court ruled in 1964 in Westbury versus Sanders that diluting the votes of U.S. citizens, which is what happens when you count the illegal aliens in a district, that is unconstitutional. So it's a ludicrous argument that
I wonder if conservatives make a mistake in having constitutional arguments with people who think the Constitution is fundamentally illegitimate because it was written by slave owners in the first place. I mean, this really has nothing to do with the Constitution. I doubt Javier Becerra knows what's in the Constitution. He doesn't care. This is all sophism. It's demagoguery designed to take power from people they don't think should have it, voters. Don't you think?
Well, I think so. And you hit the nail on the head when you said, look, it's all about power. That's why the left is apoplectic about the notion that we would be counting citizens again, like we've done through most of our country's history, because they see that this potentially could threaten the inflated number of congressional seats. But again, the Trump administration can't do it unilaterally. It would take an act of Congress next to say, okay, apportionment should not count illegal aliens. But we should have done that decades ago, by the way.
That's for sure. That and a lot of other things. Mr. Kobach, thank you for joining us. Great to see you.
My pleasure. Likewise.
This is a Fox News alert. The Orange County Board in Orange County, California, has voted to join the Trump administration's lawsuit against California and its sanctuary state law. Sandra Hutchins is sheriff of Orange County and has fought that law by publicly posting the release times of illegal immigrant inmates. California AG Javier Becerra told Fox News producer Dan Gallo he may have Sheriff Hutchins arrested for that. Watch.
State law is state law, and it's my job to enforce state law. I will do so, and we want to make sure that every jurisdiction, including Orange County, understand what state law requires of the people and the subdivisions of the state of California.
I mean, does that mean a lawsuit against the sheriff's department or an arrest of the sheriff?
Listen, I think I just answered that. Okay, thanks very much.
Sheriff Hutchins joins us tonight. Sheriff, a lot of people on the East Coast are waking up to what's going on in California, but it seems like we're moving toward a crisis here. Is that the way it seems to you?
No, it's not a crisis. It's we're as a sheriff of Orange County, I feel responsible for the public safety of the citizens of our county.
Yes.
SB 54 does not allow for that. And so I have started yesterday posting the names and dates of release of all our inmates. It's publicly accessible to all of the community, and that is well within the law provided by SB 54.
Right. What I meant by crisis is you're the chief law enforcement officer of your county, one of the biggest counties in the state. The chief law enforcement officer of the state, the attorney general, is threatening to arrest you. I've never heard of anything like that happening in any state, at least in my lifetime.
And I haven't either, and I find it interesting. Maybe he better read SB 54 again, because I don't think he understands what the law says, and what I'm doing is entirely within the confines of the law, and I'm doing what I think is important for my constituents. It's a public safety issue to me. It's not about immigration at all.
Right.
It's about individuals who have committed violent crimes. And let me just give you some examples of some individuals we've had to release. How about sex with a minor, child cruelty, domestic violence? I mean, I don't think I could sleep at night knowing that I had let somebody go and they go out and commit another crime with those kinds of charges. So I am doing something well within the law that helps me to notify ICE along with the community on when individuals are being released. It gives ICE an opportunity to pick up those individuals who are in custody for serious crimes. We're not talking about misdemeanor crimes. We're talking about serious, violent crimes.
No, you're acting out of, obviously, a moral imperative that's non-political. It's your job description. How would the Attorney General arrest you, and what will happen if he tries?
Well, I wouldn't advise it. If he's going to arrest me, then he better have some good charges, because I'm going to get an attorney and I'll fight it. But I would be very surprised if Mr. Becerra decides to make a move like that and arrest a sitting sheriff for following the law. Just because he doesn't like what I'm doing, that's not enough. I'm following the law, and I'm trying to take care of my constituents here in Orange County.
So I wonder why other law enforcement officials in other parts of the state aren't doing what you're doing, if what you're doing is consistent with California law.
I'm not sure. I think some are doing other things, but I'm not going to speak to that. But I think there are some other jurisdictions who are doing what they can to legally, under the confines of the law as it sits today, doing what they can to protect their communities. You know, the sheriffs in the state of California fought this Senate bill from the very, very beginning. Yeah. And, you know, it states that we cannot use any resources to communicate with our federal law enforcement partners,
no, I know.
Which is just ludicrous.
Well, it's dangerous, as you pointed out. Sheriff, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Well, in the wake of the anti-gun walkouts, a California teacher was suspended from her job for daring to ask a simple question. Could anti-abortion protesters do the same thing? She got bounced for that. The teacher joins us next. Almost every news outlet has pretty aggressively supported recent gun control protests for providing one-sided forums to protesters to push their view and excluding anyone who disagrees, or in fact attacking them for questioning the decency of children. How could you? But on Monday afternoon, NBC went further than that. One of the reporters outright urged his viewers to go online and sign a pledge to vote for anti-gun candidates. It happened. Here's the tape.
There's also a push called Parents Promise to Kids that encourages voters to sign a contract vowing to vote for candidates who, as they describe it, put child safety ahead of guns. I'm joined now by two of the students who started Parents Promise to Kids. Again, to those watching, you can check out Adam and Zach's contract at their website, parentspromisetokids.org. Download it, print it, sign it, and post it. We thank you all, and we wish you luck in your effort.
How long before they're, like, sending out directions to Planned Parenthood? Probably not long. Well, supposedly marches against guns are about speaking truth to power, even though they enjoy massive support from virtually everyone in power. Lawmakers, school administrators, the media, the business community, basically every billionaire on the planet. Decided to protest on another issue, though, that's not aligned with the people in power who would like to take your guns away and keep them for themselves, disempower you, as it were. And see what happens if you try to challenge the conventional view of anything. Julianne Bensel tried to do that for a moment. She teaches history at Rockland High School in California. She was placed on leave by her school after she questioned anti-gun walkouts and wondered what would happen if the school was faced with an anti-abortion protest. Would they be so supportive of that? Julianne Bensel joins us tonight. Julianne, thanks for coming on.
I appreciate the invite.
Well, it's an amazing story, and I just wonder if I misstated it in any way. You said, hypothetically, would you support a pro-life walkout, and they punished you for that?
Pretty much, Tucker. Just contextually, I just wanted to make sure that my students were informed. I had a premonition that they were not, and sure enough, most of them had no idea about the protest, and so I gave them an overview, asked them to look at it on their own, and most importantly, you just mentioned parents. I said, go talk to your parents. I'm a parent. I would want to know if my student decided to get up and walk out of class for any protest. And I received no backlash from my students. These are highly intelligent kids. It's a great school, actually, and they understood it. But somehow it got to administration that I did not fall in line and follow the herd, and they took it upon themselves to put me on administrative leave the Wednesday morning of the protest.
Did they explain why? You're not allowed to question the orthodoxy? Did they say that out loud, or was there another pretext for this?
There was a pretext, but to answer your question, they did not tell me why. They just called me at 8:30 in the morning. I arrive on campus at 9. They said, do not come in today. They gave me no reason why, and I didn't find out until about 3 o'clock that afternoon when a local news reporter knocked on my door, and she had the media report from my school district. So she actually informed me as to why. And essentially, as it has unraveled, that apparently students and parents complained about me asking this question, if there would be a possible double standard. And that was their reasoning or justification for putting me on leave.
So if there, I mean, just to kind of follow your analogy to its conclusion, if there was a pro-life march nearby, and it's California, so maybe there won't be, but let's say there was, would the school be okay with like 80% of kids going to that event?
Well, that's precisely the question I asked my very insightful students. I just flipped it and said, what do you guys think? Is this appropriate to protest during school time? Usually protests take place before school, after school, on a Saturday, on your own time. And I said, if this administration or any administration throughout the country is going to basically allow and facilitate this kind of a protest, would they do the same thing for a pro-life protest? And I have a very, very brave student who has actually taken that upon himself to challenge.
Interesting. Well, schools don't believe in fairness anymore. The left doesn't in general. And that's the lesson here, I would say. Julian, thank you. You're a brave person to come on this show, and I appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Tucker. Absolutely.
Thanks. Well, CNN is totally obsessed with a story that doesn't matter to really anybody at home or abroad, except to them. They're into it. Britt Hume's thoughts on that and on rumors in Washington that Paul Ryan could be leaving his job as Speaker of the House. Are they true? They'll tell us. Stay tuned.
Distract from his agenda.
It's actually an extraordinary cultural moment that a porn star is more credible than the President of the United States when it comes to these matters. And I don't think it's even close.
There's lots of breaking news right now, including a tweet that just came in from Stormy Daniels, the former porn star. Let's bring in our experts and discuss it.
It's so funny to watch that. You think Michael Gerson, oh, the presidency has been degraded by this. Never even considering maybe he's being degraded by it. Maybe. Press all over the Stormy Daniels story. It is the only thing that matters in a country where there are a lot of things going on. California's basically seceding from the Union. 60,000 people died of opioid OD last year. Possible war with North Korea. Maybe a recession on the horizon. Nope. Stormy Daniels, all that matters. Britt Hume is Fox's senior political analyst. Is Stormy Daniels the only story that matters to him? We invited him on tonight to ask. Britt, do you think the press are keeping this in context?
Well, I'll tell you, if Mike Gerson thinks that this is an extraordinary cultural moment, okay, I'll accept that. But why does he think it just happened? I mean, what struck me about the Stormy Daniels story in its current incarnation is that it didn't seem to tell us very much about Donald Trump that we didn't already know or should have known.
Exactly.
I mean, first of all, this particular charge was raised back before the election. It was denied. My sense about it was, as one who'd followed Trump, was that it was probably true, and that his denial was probably not true.
Exactly.
But my feeling about this is that an awful lot of people around the country thought Trump was a philanderer. After all, he bragged about it publicly back in his non-political days, and it was sort of widely known. And the fact that somebody might have gotten paid to keep it quiet didn't strike me as something that was beneath Trump. On the other, even so, he's not even accused so far of being the one that made the payment. So my sense about this was that it was kind of baked in the cake. People knew what kind of a rascal he was when it came to this sort of stuff, a certified philanderer and lover of flashy women, and didn't tell him anything they didn't already know.
And they voted for him anyway. And you'd think at some point the dumb people on television would ask themselves, well, why would voters do that? Do you think they're pro-porn star? Probably not. Maybe the leadership of the people in charge was so bad that people felt they had to vote for Trump. Speaking of leadership, all these rumors about Paul Ryan resigning supposedly in a matter of weeks, certainly before the midterms, he says these rumors are not true. What do you think?
Well, look, I think that I think there's a chance he will retire at the end of this term. He's been in public life a long time. He's never really made any money. I think he looks ahead. What has Paul Ryan been about as a politician, principally? He's been about growth economics. Yes. That is a preoccupation of his. You remember, he's a disciple, you recall, of Jack Kemp. And they've now passed what is basically a supply-side tax bill, although it affects corporate America more than individual citizens. We all know that. But he worked a long time to get something like that through. He's finally done it. As he looks ahead, I can't imagine that he thinks that the near-term prospects for adding on to that in any meaningful way are very good. And he's likely to have a smaller majority in the House. He's had a very hard time corralling his somewhat bulky caucus to follow the leaders on a number of things. So he may well have had enough, and I wouldn't blame him if he had. He's a good man. It'd be a loss, in my opinion, but I think it's distinctly possible.
Do you think that he would be replaced by someone who's more sympathetic to Trump's ideological agenda, to the extent he has an ideological agenda, but on immigration, for example? Would the party change?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I don't. I really don't. I haven't really taken a census of the views of his potential likely successors. I'm sure someone from the Freedom Caucus will run, and will run as basically a Trumpian. Steve Scalise would be a candidate. He's wildly popular. I think he's pretty wildly popular throughout the House. It doesn't mean any Democrats would vote for him, but he's very well liked. The president is known to like Kevin McCarthy. Who's the leader? But remember, he ran the last time when Paul Ryan won. He ran his flag up the pole, and not enough people saluted. So it's hard to say who would prevail in that contest.
Likeable guys, though. Well, thank you for that.
They're all. Yeah, you bet, Tucker.
Good to see you. Well, the FBI was not able to detect Omar Mateen plotting his massacre at the Pulse nightclub in Florida, even after they recruited his father as an informant, which they did. You didn't know that because they covered it up for almost 2 years. Glenn Greenwald has been on this story for weeks, and he joins us next. Well, the FBI ignored warnings about Nicholas Cruz in Florida. In Garland, Texas, an agent directly assisted Islamic extremists who attempted to commit a massacre. Now it turns out that the FBI recruited the father of Pulse nightclub shooter Omar Mateen as an informant. And yet, somehow, despite that, they didn't notice that Mateen was plotting this massacre, they say. They covered up that failure for nearly 2 years. Glenn Greenwald is the co-founder of The Intercept. He joins us tonight. Glenn, you've written a bunch of stories on this, and at first I wondered why, because it seemed like a pretty straightforward story. I thought we knew kind of what we were going to know, but you were right. There was a lot we didn't know. Tell us what we didn't know about this massacre.
The primary narrative that the media circulated pretty much until this minute is totally false, namely that Omar Mateen went into Pulse with the intention to target gay people. Lots of people love this narrative. The right loved it because they like to depict Muslims as being incompatible with the West and hating gays. The left loved it because it put LGBTs as the victim of a hate crime. The security state loved it because they like to pretend they defend liberalism with the CIA and the FBI. The reality is that he had never been to Pulse. He had gone to multiple other locations in the days leading up to the attack and on that day that had nothing to do with the gay community. Disney, other places that he had judged were too fortified by security. And he chose Pulse randomly by entering Google and asking, what is a Orlando downtown nightclub? The evidence is overwhelming that he was motivated, not anything to do with gays, but by what he said during the entire attack, which was it was being done in retaliation for what he perceived as 15 years of U.S. killing of Muslims, women and children who are innocent in Muslim countries.
Interesting. Now we learn that his father was an FBI informant. This fits a pattern with these massacres, and I don't think we know enough to really understand what it means, but tell us what we do know about this.
Well, so the FBI has been caught lying repeatedly throughout this case. The day after the Pulse attack, they detained his wife for 17 hours. She had a small infant. She has a very low IQ. And they got her to sign a statement that was filled with false claims, including the fact that she had gone to Pulse with her husband to case it. They investigated it, and they determined, the FBI did, that she had never been to Pulse. They got her to sign a false statement by threatening they would take away her child, by playing on her vulnerabilities, and they hid from the court the fact that many of the key statements, the incriminating ones that they got her to sign, were false. What they also hid, not just from the court, but from her lawyers, was this critical fact, namely that Omar Mateen's father, who they had planned to call as a witness, was working as an informant very closely with the FBI for 11 years, from 2005 to 2016. The FBI had twice investigated Omar Mateen after he was boasting about having connections to terrorism, and they decided they wouldn't investigate him further. They weren't going to arrest him. They weren't going to do anything. Jim Comey said, we're going to provide an explanation about why we made that choice. To date, they've never done so. When we called them for comment, they refused. And as it turns out, they were talking to their informant during the time they were investigating Omar Mateen. It's pretty clear that they decided not to arrest him because they were working so closely with his father, a fact, as you said, that they concealed from everybody until just a couple days ago.
That is It's just I mean, you or I lie to the FBI, we're charged with a felony. They lie to us. It's no big deal. I see you're wearing a remembrance on your lapel for a Rio de Janeiro city council member shot after advocating there. That's a really interesting story. We're out of time, but we're going to tweet out a link to that story. You've written about it a lot on The Intercept, and I think it's worth our viewers hearing about. Thanks a lot for joining us tonight, Glenn.
Thank you, Tucker.
Meanwhile, Hazleton, Pennsylvania has changed an awful lot thanks to immigration. Elite neighborhoods, though, basically look like it's 1955. Why is that? We'll get to that in just a minute. We told you last night about the scandal swirling around the Interior Secretary Ryan Zinke. According to new reporting by CNN, Zinke may once have suggested in private that he still believes in the meritocracy. That would make him the last person in power in this country who does. So, of course, it was highly controversial. Through a spokesman, though, Zinke denied that slander. Of course he doesn't believe in hiring on merit, on the basis of who's more qualified or who has the most relevant experience or in any of those bigoted skills-based criteria. At the Department of the Interior, they hire on the basis of genetics, on what people look like. Ryan Zinke believes in diversity, just like everybody else. But, of course, no one believed him. In an op-ed for CNN today, Andre Perry of the Brookings Institution said that Zinke's preference for qualified people could, quote, threaten the security of the country. Senator Bob Menendez of New Jersey recently returned from his federal corruption trial. Congratulations, Bob. Went even further than that. In a statement, Menendez accused Zinke of trying to create a, quote, lily-white department. Well, there's obviously no worse crime than that. White departments being prima facie immoral, something a mad scientist thought up. And, of course, Menendez would know, himself being one of the single whitest members ever to serve in the U.S. Senate. He gets a pass on that, though, because whatever else you might say about Bob Menendez, he would never even consider hiring someone on the basis of relevant qualifications. Recently, we told you on this program about the wave of demographic change that has transformed the city of Hazleton, Pennsylvania. In the year 2000, Hazleton was less than 2% Hispanic. Today, thanks to mass immigration, Hazleton is majority Hispanic. More than half of the residents there speak a language other than English at home. Now, we got those numbers from a recent piece in National Geographic, which quoted lifelong Hazleton residents as saying they no longer recognized their own hometown. They didn't hate immigrants. Most Americans like immigrants. But this was too much change. In fewer than 20 years, the culture their parents and grandparents had built evaporated. They never asked for any of that. It was just imposed on them. They were bewildered, understandably. But not everyone understands or even cares. This morning, CNN ran a hit piece on that segment. Writer Ron Brownstein described it as, quote, an extraordinary screed against diversity, whatever that means. He suggested we were bigots for talking about the subject at all. This, of course, is how you bully people into being quiet while you permanently change their country. And usually it works because nobody wants the headache of that. But in this case, it's an important enough topic that we're going to go a little deeper on it. What happened in Hazleton is happening around the country. Neighborhoods transformed forever with no public debate. What's interesting is where this is not happening, in the neighborhoods where the people who make these decisions live. Here's some numbers. In Storm Lake, Iowa, only a tiny percentage of the population was foreign-born just 25 years ago. Now more than half of all residents of Storm Lake don't speak English at home. Hamtramck, Michigan had 2 Bangladeshi residents in 1990. Today, that city is majority Muslim. Fewer than 40% of the people who live there speak English at home. In his CNN piece, Ron Brownstein suggests this whole conversation is about white fear. Liberals often say that. Almost always they say that, probably to hide the truth of it, which is that the starkest effects of mass immigration don't take place in white neighborhoods. They take place where native-born African Americans live. For example, not so long ago, Compton, California, the famous Compton, was the largest black community west of the Mississippi. Today, only a third of Compton's population is African American. The rest is Hispanic. That's huge change. That's massive dislocation. Nobody talks about it. People like Ron Brownstein shout them into silence. But it's real. And for a lot of people who used to live there, it's traumatic. Now let's consider how the other half lives, the people who are making these decisions about immigration and demographic change. Are their neighborhoods changing like Hazleton and Storm Lake and Compton? Come on, you know the answer to that. LA County is now overwhelmingly Hispanic, but not upper-income Malibu, where the famous liberals live, where everybody supports these changes. Malibu is still 80% white, 87% white, actually. New York City, diverse place, of course, but not in Michael Bloomberg's neighborhood. His zip code is 82% white. It's less than 5% Hispanic. It's still 1985 where Michael Bloomberg lives. It probably always will be. That's the point. Same with Barack Obama's neighborhood here in Washington. That zip code is less than 8% Hispanic. Meanwhile, just across the river in the suburbs in Virginia, more Spanish-speaking every year. Obama loves that. He just doesn't want to live near it. Diversity for thee, but not for me. You see how it works, no matter what Ron Brownstein tells you. Lou Barletta was the mayor of Hazleton, Pennsylvania. He was attacked, harshly attacked, for trying to fight changes to his city. Today he represents Pennsylvania in Congress, and he joins us tonight. Congressman, thanks for coming up.
Good to be here, Tucker.
So I just want to restate, because I don't think you can say it enough, that I think most people like immigrants because most immigrants are great, including the ones in your hometown. It's really a question of who gets to decide what the changes are and how big they are. And I always wondered, for a town like Hazleton, the people who live there have any say in it at all?
No, they didn't have any say in it, Tucker, and I was at the forefront of that issue in Hazleton, where we saw a very sudden migration of newcomers coming into the city with no real explanation as to why it was happening and why Hazleton. And it is startling for a community to see a change like that. And to give you a good example, in the year 2000, English as the second language in the Hazleton area school district, the budget, it was $500. 5 years later, it was $1.5 million. So that just gives you a glimpse of how fast it happened.
So we're always told that when you bring in huge amounts of poor people from the third world with low levels of education, that you get much richer when you do that. That's the key to prosperity. No one who makes these decisions does it in their own neighborhoods, but they're always saying it's going to make you richer. Has Hazleton become richer?
No, and quite the opposite. It becomes much more difficult when your income tax goes down. Our population grew by 50%, but our tax revenue stayed the same. And that's when we realized we not only had an illegal immigration problem on top of it all, but no, when people are coming in and are of the lower income or the lower end of the economic ladder, it's less tax money that you're getting, and it becomes more difficult to provide services.
So why do all the experts like Ron Brownstein at CNN say that you're a bigot if you have concerns? And they're telling you that you're richer and happier. Why won't you admit it?
Sure. I had this discussion. I was on a panel with Mayor Bloomberg at one time when he said, New York City's economy would crash if it didn't have illegal immigrants. Who would wash our dishes? Who would bus our tables? Who would clean our hotel rooms? But in small towns like Hazleton, where it's very transparent, it's an entire different story.
Yeah, it is. And I noticed that Michael Bloomberg's census tract in New York is like 5% Hispanic. So he's a hypocrite like the rest of them. You are not, though, Congressman. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you, Tucker.
I want to bring you some news that's just broken. China has confirmed that North Korean dictator Kim Jong-un did indeed make a visit to China, by train apparently, to meet Chinese President Xi Jinping. It was Kim's first trip abroad that we know about since taking over the Hermit Kingdom in 2011. It comes as preparations continue for a meeting between Kim and our own president. Of course, we'll be covering that meeting, needless to say, and we'll stay on the story more broadly. Free speech is the greatest right we have. Increasingly, it's embattled by the sources of tolerance. One recent high school graduate learned that lesson the hard way, but he had a tape recorder with him, thank heaven. We've got it for you next. Freedom of speech is the most important right you as an American have. You were born with it, but that doesn't mean you can exercise it. Wynn Tompkins learned that the hard way recently. Tompkins is a recent high school graduate in Providence, Rhode Island. He decided to help his community by joining a program called City Year that helps inner city schools. City Year is affiliated with AmeriCorps. It receives federal funding. 2 months ago, for Martin Luther King Day, the program held a diversity workshop, and white program members were ordered to go to the basement of the building. They were told, Tompkins was told, that white people are a historically oppressive group, all of them, not just the ones who've oppressed others, and they needed to atone for that. Tompkins didn't buy it. He said he was just a 19-year-old, and he didn't want to feel guilty for things he didn't do, sins he didn't commit. Well, the next day he was summoned by City Year by an administrator called Jenny Johnson. She berated him for his opinions. He recorded part of that meeting. Watch.
Just the same as someone who's born black should not feel shame for being black, someone who is born white should not feel shame for being white. I don't think that's an upsetting statement to make. I don't think that's being unreasonable.
Okay. Thank you. I disagree.
I disagree. She didn't explain why she disagreed or why he was wrong. She just fired him. Tompkins was dismissed from City Year. We contacted Johnson, who claimed that, quote, political beliefs have no bearing on volunteers. When we shared the recording, told her we actually had it on tape, she refused further comment, and we'll leave it to you to decide why. That's about it for us tonight. Tune in every night at 8 p.m. Eastern Time to the show that is the sworn enemy of lying, pomposity, smugness, and especially groupthink, in whose clutches this country finds itself, and we're doing our best to resist. Jennifer Palmieri from the Clinton campaign has a new book out, and she's going to join us tomorrow night. That'll be fun. Good night from Washington. Sean Hannity's next. Hey, Sean.
Hey, Tucker. Great show as always, and welcome.